Well, today we're going to take a look at Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15. We're going to be looking at verses 33 down through verses 41. This is going to cover the actual death of Jesus on the cross. Up to this point, we have gone through his arrest and his trial and being before Pilate and then being beaten by the soldiers and then marched out to be hung on the cross, and now he is hanging on the cross. And in this passage today, we're going to read and study about his death. This is essential. It is Good Friday. This is what we call it. It is the Friday of Passover. So this is less than 24 hours since he was in the upper room with his disciples, celebrating the Passover meal, the Last Supper as we call it. And so a lot has transpired in the last 24 hours. And now it culminates in his death upon the cross. And as we look at this passage, of course, we're going to examine the significance of what this death means, the significance of the timing of this death, the significance of the prophecy that led up to this death, and how we will see in studying this passage how God has always been working towards this. This has always been a part of the plan. Many times we don't understand the bigger picture. We don't understand what God is doing in the midst of life. But we have a faith and we believe that God knows what he's up to and God knows what he's doing. And so in essence, in this trajectory of this understanding of God knowing, we take on the role of follower. And that's hard for us as human beings. It's hard for us to be followers. We want to be leaders. In fact, from the very moment we can remember, we have been taught to be a leader, to take charge, to take control. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a leader and taking charge and taking control, just as long as you understand that even leaders have to follow something or someone. And as a leader, we are called to follow the Lord. And so we see in this story the ultimate picture of following with Jesus, following all the way to death on the cross. And as followers of Jesus, we are called to get good at following, using Jesus as example. So let's take a look at Mark chapter 15. We're going to pick up in verse 33. I'm going to read down to verse 41, and then we'll go back and we'll take a look at this passage. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of these standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. Thanks be to God for the reading of this word. The first thing that we want to take a look at is the timing. Again, understanding as we're reading a gospel account, as we're reading a biblical account, we have to always ask the question, who is writing and who's the audience? Because that will directly relate to what is being shared. Just like you and I, when we talk to someone, we always consider our audience in the words that we choose, in the way that we present things. You might even present the very same thing to two people in totally different ways because you are aware of how they will input the information. You're aware of how they will react to the information. Thus, you phrase it differently. Thus, you put it differently. You say the same things, but you kind of wrap it up in a different package because you realize the audience that you're talking to. And it's the same for Mark. It's the same for all the gospel writers. It's the same for all New Testament writers. It's the same, in fact, it's the same for all biblical writers. Is this understanding of who am I talking to? Who's my audience? Where are they coming from? What's their perspective? What's the things that will excite them? What's the things that will make them mad? What are the things that are going to be important to them? Those are all a part of our understanding of the Gospels. So when we take a look at this passage, we see at the very beginning, Mark takes the time to give us the time frame. He doesn't just say, on that day, on Friday, Jesus was on the cross. It says, at noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. So there's a couple things that we must take a look at with that passage. First and foremost, we must understand that it's Friday. It's Friday of Passover week. Last night, Jesus was in the upper room with his disciples celebrating the Passover meal. And then today is the day that the Passover lambs are sacrificed. So you might be asking yourself, why in the world was Jesus in the upper room with his disciples celebrating the Passover meal when today is the day that the Passover lambs are being slaughtered? The reason is because it was tradition for rabbis to meet with their disciples, with their students, the night before the actual celebration of the Passover so that they could do the Passover with their disciples, do the Passovers with their students. To remind them, remember, this is a Passover meal that is celebrated every single year, and every single person who experiences the Passover has experienced it before, unless they're young and it's the first time they've experienced it. But we have to remember that there's a whole year between the celebrations of the Passover meal. And just like you and me, if you only do something once a year, you have a tendency to kind of forget a little bit about it. You don't remember all the details. So it's important for a rabbi to meet with their students the night before they actually celebrate the Passover, to review the Passover, to do the Passover meal together so that the students then can go out to their homes, to their families, to their communities on the actual day of Passover and celebrate the Passover meal together. And it's a reminder, so it's a little bit of a run through the night before. And this is why Jesus was able to celebrate the Passover in that upper room with his disciples. For remember, Jesus in that week, that Holy Week, from triumphant entry to the cleansing of the temple to all the teaching he was doing in the temple, it's hard for Jesus and his disciples to find a place where they can just be alone. Well, this happened on that Thursday night because it was tradition that was the night that a rabbi would take his disciples, his students up, or take them somewhere and to celebrate the Passover together. It was traditionally understood that this would be a time when they would be alone with each other. And so this is why it happened. But now on the Friday, the Passover meals for the rest of the people, in Judea and Jerusalem, were going to be sacrificed. So there's a whole ritual that's going on in the temple, and the Passover lambs are being sacrificed at the exact time that Jesus is hanging on the cross. At the exact time that Jesus is dying on the cross, the Passover lambs are being sacrificed, and Jesus is the ultimate Passover lamb. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. So for 3 hours, there was a darkness in the land, and this was the time that the Passover lambs were being slaughtered. But also, too, it's important for us to understand that Mark is sharing this time frame because it connects to a prophetic word from the Old Testament. So we're going to turn back. So I want you to keep your hand or mark this page, and mark this page, and we're going to go back to the Old Testament to a book named Amos. So you're going to be looking for Amos. Now Amos, if you get to Psalms, make a right, because Amos is in the prophetic words after the Psalms and after Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So we're looking for the book of Amos. No, it has nothing to do with Amos and Andy. Totally different. Amos. Amos here, and we're going to go to Amos chapter 8. Amos chapter 8. We're going to be looking at verses 9 and 10. Amos chapter 8, verses 9 and 10. Again, remember, it's not a sin to go back and use the table of contents. God did create the table of contents so that we could find things in the Bible, so don't feel bad about using it. In fact, when I was studying this and it referred to Amos, I had to go to the table of contents to kind of find the page because sometimes Bibles get so big and so overwhelming that it's hard to find something in there. So don't feel bad about using the table of contents. So do you have it? Amos chapter 8, verses 9 and 10. All right, let's listen to what Amos has to say in chapter 8, verses 9 and 10. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord. Remember, this is the prophetic word of someone who lived hundreds of years before Jesus was ever born. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your religious festivals into mourning and all your singing into weeping. I will make all of you wear sackcloth and shave your heads. I will make the time like mourning for an only son, and the end of it like a bitter day. It's incredible whenever we make these connections with the Old Testament. Not only does Amos prophesy about the Lord turning the daylight into darkness, but he also prophesies about, I will turn your righteous festivals into mourning in verse 10. I will turn your righteous festivals into mourning. And remember, Jesus is dying on the cross while the Passover lambs are being slaughtered, ritually slaughtered by the priests in the temple. And so it's a preparation for one of the most sacred festivals in Jesus' day, and that's Passover. And all this is happening as a background to Jesus dying on the cross. And God predicted it through Amos hundreds of years before Jesus was ever born. And that's why it's so important for us to have the time frame here. That's why it's important for us to know that Jesus was going to die on the cross during a festival, during the Passover, a perfect festival for that. And so we have here at noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3, so what happened at 3 o'clock? At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And so here we have Jesus hanging on the cross. Remember, we believe that Jesus was taken out to be crucified roughly around 9 a.m. So sometime around 9 a.m. he was hung on the cross. At noon, darkness came over the whole land. So he was on the cross at 9. At noon, darkness came over the whole land, and it stayed dark for 3 hours. So from noon to 3. So now Jesus has been on the cross from 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, the translation, my God, why have you forsaken me? And now we understand that this is a reference to in the book of Psalms, to Psalm 22:1. But also, too, I want to take a look at what he's saying there. Because many times this is a very bothersome statement by Jesus. For we believe up to this point, we've understood and had this conversation that Jesus is God incarnate. When the angel Gabriel came to Mary, when he announced to her that she would be pregnant and that she would have a son, and they would call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And so from the very beginning, there's been this understanding that Jesus is not only the Son of God, because he was not the son of Joseph, the Son of God, but also, too, that Jesus was God incarnate, that Jesus was God coming and dwelling in human form and walking among us. So if Jesus is God, then why would Jesus be saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Basically, he's saying, oh me, why have I forsaken myself? This is this notion, this understanding of confusion that comes in this place. But it isn't confusing if you truly understand what's happening. We have here Jesus, we believe, is 33 years old. Jesus has lived his entire life on earth being God incarnate, being God in human form, being Emmanuel, God with us. And through that whole 33 years, God and Jesus were one. They were connected. There was no separation. There was no isolation. There was no disconnection. It was like Jesus and God were together, like you and your breath is together. You don't even think about it anymore. It just happens. Well, now here we have Jesus on the cross, and he has gone to the cross for a specific purpose. He's gone to the cross to pay the price for the sins of the world, to pay the price for the sins of all the descendants of Adam and Eve who brought in the first sin, the original sin, into the world. And what is sin? Sin is the separation from God. And sin is anything that separates us from God. So in this moment, on this cross, when the lights have gone out and it's dark during the day, Jesus, the very presence of God, the incarnation of God on earth, Jesus in his human form has every single sin of the world heaped upon him. Every sin that has ever happened since Adam and Eve, and every sin that will happen from Jesus to the end of time. Your sin, my sin, everybody's sin is heaped on his shoulders. Again, sin being the separation, anything that separates us from God, all of that is heaped on his shoulders. So in that moment, for the very first time in his 33 years of human existence, Jesus is experiencing separation from God. Jesus is experiencing what it's like to have a sin-stained nature, which he hasn't experienced his whole life. So this is something brand new to him. Yet it's brand new to him in a 33-year-old body, so he can express it. He can take it in. He can materialize it. He can experience this separation. And so he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Not that God is up in heaven forsaking him, but Jesus for the first time is experiencing the sin, is experiencing the separation. First time in 33 years he's ever experienced something like this. And so he just cries out. He cries out with this separation from God. My God, why have you forsaken me? When some of these standing near heard this, so they heard him call out, my God, why have you forsaken me? They said, listen, he's calling Elijah. Well, either they were hard of hearing, because Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani doesn't sound like Elijah. But remember, Jesus was beaten so badly, he was scourged so badly by the Roman soldiers that he couldn't even carry his cross up to the place where he was going to be crucified. They had to grab somebody else to carry it for him. He was that bad off. There are descriptions that he probably would have been unrecognizable because of his body being beaten so bad, and it had been so deformed with blood and injuries and swollenness. He would have been unrecognizable. So he's probably not speaking very clearly. He's probably not enunciating his words perfectly. So as he's up on the cross and people are on the ground and they're around watching and listening, and there's all the other noise, because remember, 2 other men are being crucified with him. So there's all this noise and activity that's going on around him. And they crucify people in a public place so that people can see the crucifixions happening, because they use it as a deterrent to crime. Don't do this because you'll end up here. And so this is a public place, and so there's lots of noise. So Jesus is not enunciating his words, and there's a lot of background noise. So we can cut him a break, and we can probably understand how they heard him say something that he didn't say. So he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. And Elijah is a very important character because, of course, the prophetic word says that Elijah will come before the Messiah. Elijah will come and comfort the Messiah. And we know from our study in Mark earlier that the Elijah character is played by John the Baptist. That John the Baptist was the one who went out before him and made his path straight. That John the Baptist was the one that called out and declared the truth in the wilderness. And so they're saying, listen, he's calling Elijah. Verse 36, someone ran. Do you have that in translation? Someone? Yeah, it's not specifically who it is, and this is one of those things that we've pointed out before, that sometimes in the Gospels you get a very clear picture of who's there, a name, a description, who they're related to, maybe a profession. But here we just have someone. Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, and put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. Because Jesus was crying out, he's on the cross. This is definitely a very, very horrible, traumatic thing physically that's going on. And earlier we realized, or we learned, that there was a group of people, mostly women, who had a ministry to crucified people. They had a ministry of offering comfort. And when Jesus was first put on the cross, they gave him a mixture of wine and myrrh. It was a mixture basically of a narcotic and alcohol, hoping to deaden his senses a little bit. And they offered this to all the people that they crucified. It was a part of their ministry, as a part of their outreach to try to ease the suffering. And he turned it down. He said no, because he said he can't drink that, because he said in the Passover meal the night before, I won't drink of the fruit of the vine until I drink it anew with you in the kingdom of heaven. So of course he couldn't drink that wine while I was on the cross. So now he's cried out. Obviously he's in pain. Obviously he's suffering. And so someone, probably another one of those group, maybe even the same person, the same woman, a person in that group, that ministry, came to give him some kind of relief. And so someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar. So this would have been a mixture of vinegar and wine. Sounds absolutely disgusting. Put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. Put it on a staff so they could raise it up to his mouth so he could drink. Now, leave him alone. Leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. So someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. So this is a different person that's watching this and saying, okay, he's not taking the drink. Leave him alone. Let's sit here and see if Elijah comes. He's called out for Elijah. Let's see if Elijah comes and rescues him. Again, there's this notion of saying, almost a mocking, of saying, if you are who you say you are, then this can't happen to you. If you are the Son of God, this can't happen to you. If you are the King of the Jews, this can't happen to you. If you are the Son of Man, this can't happen to you. If you are the Messiah, this can't happen to you. You can't die on the cross. And so they're mocking him almost. It's not that they believe Elijah is going to come. They're mocking him. And so he says, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. With a loud cry, verse 37, Jesus breathed his last. So verse 37 of chapter 15 in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is dead. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And it's important for us to know that Mark is recording this as with a loud cry. Most people who are on the cross, they die of crucifixion, they die of asphyxiation. They can't breathe. When you're hanging on a cross, being nailed, and you're hanging by your arms and by your feet, you push up on the nail of your feet, trying to keep your rib cage off of your lungs. Your lungs are filling up with fluids because your body's not operating correctly, and then your rib cage is closing down on your lungs, and so it makes it hard to breathe. So most people who suffer crucifixion die of asphyxiation, and they usually last a day or more on the cross. Here it's been since 9 a.m. and now it's between noon and 3, and it's 3 o'clock. It's a little bit after 3 o'clock now that Jesus has been on the cross, and he shouts out, and it says here, with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. So with the loud cry, we understand medically that Jesus didn't die of asphyxiation. Because if you are asphyxiated, meaning you can't breathe, there's no way you're letting out a loud cry. And so Jesus died of other medical reasons. And people have looked at this and said there's probably his scourging and his beating that he took before he got on the cross caused him to lose so much blood. That this is the reason why he died on the cross at 3 p.m. as opposed to lasting longer. He died with a loud cry as opposed to being asphyxiated. But with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. So in verse 37 of chapter 15, Jesus, the human body, is dead. He has died on the cross. And at that moment, look at that in verse 38, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now remember, we talked about earlier that this was a significant time period because at the same time that Jesus was dying on the cross, the priests were performing the rituals that they needed to perform to bless the Passover lambs and to sacrifice the Passover lambs to get them ready for the Judeans to use them in the Passover meal that day. And so as this was happening, Jesus was dying on the cross. And so he breathed his last in verse 37. And over across town in the temple was divided into sections. You had the court of women, you had the court of Gentiles on the outside, the court of women, and then you had the inner court. And in the inner court, you had the Holy of Holies, and that was God's throne room. That was the place where one priest could go in one time a year to offer an offering so that the sins of the nation could be forgiven. And it was such a holy place, such a place to be revered and feared, that the priest that would go in once a year, they would tie a rope around his ankle, so that if he was in the Holy of Holies and he dropped dead because he was in the presence of God, they could pull his body out without having to go in themselves and possibly expose themselves to death. It was such a ritual, and such an honor for the chief priest or the high priest or whoever the priest is that's going into the Holy of Holies that year, that they remain clean, they remain pure, so pure that for 24 hours before they would go into the Holy of Holies once a year, they would have fellow priests stay with them and read scripture to them to keep them awake. For they didn't even want to fall asleep for fear that they would fall asleep and have a dream that would defile them, have a dream that would make them ritually unclean, so they could not go in the Holy of Holies. This is how serious this was. Well, the separation between the Holy of Holies and the court of the priests, the court of the Jewish people outside of the Holy of Holies, was a curtain. That was what separated the two. At one time, the Ark of the Covenant was inside there, but the Ark of the Covenant has been gone since the Babylonian exile many years before. And so now it is just God's throne room. It's God's home on earth, so to speak. And it's separated by a curtain. And it's not just a curtain like you and I have on our windows. The description of the curtains that I found is that the curtain was 80 feet high and roughly about 4 inches thick. That's how big this curtain was. So it wasn't a curtain that was just prone to fall apart. It was a very huge, thick curtain. Like I said, 80 feet high and 4 inches thick, separating the outside to the Holy of Holies on the inside. And so the curtain of the temple, this curtain, 80 feet high, 4 inches thick, was torn from top to bottom. No people went in and got up on a ladder and cut it and tore it. It just tore all by itself. It tore from top to bottom. And the representation of this, of course, is the fact that up until this time, if you wanted to commune with God, if you wanted to be in the presence of God, you had to go into that Holy of Holies on the other side of this curtain. Now that Jesus has died on the cross, in verse 37, he dies on the cross. Now because of his death and the subsequent resurrection that's coming up, but because of his death, there is no need now for the separation. The curtain is torn in two because the Holy of Holies has now been opened up. For Jesus has died on the cross, and so the sin debt has been paid. No longer is there a need for the priest to go in there once a year and to make an offering for the sins of the people of Israel, because Jesus has paid the price. It's done. No longer needing of a Holy of Holies. In essence, the temple and its function is totally done now. It's totally over. And the tearing of the curtain in two is a representation of that. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." And so we look at it and say, who's it that's saying this? It's the centurion. So this would have been the Roman soldier who would have been in charge of the crucifixion. The soldiers in our verses last week that were casting lots for Jesus' clothes, they were the subordinates of the centurion. So this centurion was in charge of the detail, the Roman soldiers that were looking over and taking care of this crucifixion. So he was the chief cook and bottle washer, so to speak, at the crucifixion. So, and when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus, so he was standing in front of the cross when Jesus died, and he saw how he died. He didn't die of asphyxiation. He died with a loud cry. He said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Now this is interesting because remember, Jesus was crucified on a cross with his charge up above him. Up on a plaque above him was put the King of the Jews, and that was his charge. That's what he was found guilty of. That was the accusation that the Jewish people brought to Pilate for Jesus. And so Pilate putting that up there was kind of mocking the Jewish leaders because he knew that this was a political thing. He knew that Jesus didn't deserve to die. But he said, okay, if you want to accuse him to be the King of the Jews, I'll go ahead and crucify him, but that'll be his title, the King of the Jews. And so it says King of the Jews right above his head, but this centurion doesn't say here, He stood there in front of Jesus, saw how he died. He said, surely this man was the King of the Jews. He doesn't say that. He said, surely this man was the Son of God. In this moment, we don't know who this centurion is. We don't know his background story. We don't know if he was someone that kind of from the outside watched Jesus and followed Jesus. We don't know anything about that. But what we do know is in this moment, at that place, at the foot of the cross, when Jesus dies, that centurion got it. He understood who Jesus was, that he was the Son of God. He wasn't just the King of the Jews. He wasn't just the Messiah. He was the Son of God. And so he declares this outwardly. He makes this confession, possibly a confession out of total ignorance. He just had those words plop right into his spirit, right into his soul, because that's all he could say at that moment. Whatever the case may be, he makes the declaration that this is the Son of God. Surely this man was the Son of God. Verse 40, some women were watching from a distance. Among them, so there was more women than what is mentioned here, but among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Salome. So we have Mary Magdalene, no description because Mary Magdalene is well known to the people that have followed the gospel because she has been with Jesus for a while. And this has been a woman that has been a part of taking care of Jesus. And Jesus, of course, has extended many blessings and even healed her, exorcised demons from her life. Then we have Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph. So Mary's not as well known by Mark's audience because he has to explain who she is. It is not Mary, the mother of Jesus, but it's Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph. And then we have Salome, and then she says, and Salome. And so Salome is the mother, the actual mother, the birth mother of John, the disciple who Jesus has now turned Mary, his mother, over to. John has taken on Mary as his mother now at the request of Jesus as he was hanging on the cross. We have that from another gospel. And so we have Salome, which is the mother of the disciple John. In Galilee, these women had followed and cared for his needs. These women had followed Jesus and cared for his needs. They had this special ministry to Jesus, following and caring for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. So we have this picture of the disciples have scattered. Jesus predicted this. All of you will fall away. The disciples have scattered, but the women have stayed. The women who have this ministry of caring for Jesus have stayed, which makes sense because of the fact that he's going to need cared for. His body's going to need cared for. He needs cared for as he's hanging on the cross. Maybe these were the people that offered him the wine vinegar. Maybe these were the people that were offering him it's any kind of comfort they could give him. But we have this reference here in the Gospel of Mark, and it's important for us to note that he really shines a light on this. He spends 2 verses of this story on it, and that is to list and to include the women who are a part of this ministry, who are a part of Jesus's life, who are a part of this death on the cross. And that's significant because there's a caring ministry here that is a part of these women's lives. And Mark is honoring that, and so it's important for us to take that into account. Obviously, it was important for Mark and Mark's community for them to know that these women were not only present, but they have been present with Jesus. And they're not only offering a ministry of comfort and care now, they have always offered a ministry of comfort and care. And so that's how we end this story today. Jesus is dead on the cross. The centurion is standing there, and he's declared him the Son of God. And the cross is surrounded by these women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Lesser, and Salome, and other women. And they have been with him all through Galilee. They have been with him through all his ministry. And they are there at the very end. But his disciples are not. His disciples have gone just as he predicted. They have all scattered. They've all fallen away. And that's where we're going to leave off today. And I pray that you found a blessing in this word. And if there was a blessing for you, I pray that you would share this study with someone else. Maybe they will need that word today. Maybe they will find a blessing in these words. So until we come back next week and we look at the burial of Jesus, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in. And I pray that you stay safe and that you stay sane.